Dressage is a demanding and precise discipline. A balanced foot is critical to the success and safety of the horse. Today we're going to look at some common hoof distortions and how we can correct them using some simple protocols and guidelines. Let's get to it.
Hi, my name's Steve Foxworth and I'm a member of the ELPO, and today we're going to look at dressage horses. There's been many questions about using the principles or the guidelines of the ELPO with the widest part of the foot and placing the shoe around the bone or around the joint, and if that is something that's feasible for dressage horses. What we found so far is that I have 80 to 100 dressage horses in my business, anywhere from training level through Grand Prix, young rider horses, and so on. So we see the full gamut, and what I'm going to show you today is that oftentimes the things that we see in dressage horses are very minute, and oftentimes the things that we'll get for feedback from clients or trainers or the riders is that they may have an unwillingness to go to the right or to the left when they're riding, or it's just a little bit harder, or maybe they'll want to break in the canter, or those are the type of things that we have to hear. And dressage horses are extremely important in the work that they do, and the fact that most horses are designed to go into straight lines and then turn, and we've changed their jobs, and dressage horses especially are meant to go in circle after circle in a 20 by 60 meter arena. And so most of the lamenesses or issues that we see with horses or dressage horses have to do with turning. And this guy here is a 6-year-old Dutch warm blood. His name is Avanti. He was purchased a week and a half ago in Wellington, Florida. He's a very talented young horse, an up-and-coming horse. In 2008, he was, I believe he was champion Dutch horse. And so he's a very nice prospect, and some of the things that we're going to look at with Avanti is that his feet really aren't very distorted. They're in very good proportions, at least from the outside and looking at this direction. The hoof pastern axis is fairly straight. He's at about 7.5 weeks right now. He's due to be shod, and he just seems to have a little bit of issues. One of them is forging. The other is that he tends to have a harder time to go to the left than he does to the right, and he tends to want to break in his canter. So we think there's a couple of things with his front end as well as his hind end. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the balance of the foot. We're going to evaluate it. We're possibly going to leverage test him just to see where he is in his comfort on his front feet and see if there's something we can do with helping him go to the left. And hopefully we'll give you some information today that will be helpful in the future. Okay. Can you see how he reaches with that right front immediately? So he's got a full range of motion. He'll reach out in front of him, land, go all the way through his stride from front to back with no issue going to the right. So it's very fluid. He doesn't seem like he has any concern going to the right at all. He's also much more willing to canter to the right, whereas to the left he kept wanting to break in the canter, and here he just seems like it's no big deal. She doesn't have to ask him to go. As a matter of fact, she'll have to ask him to slow back down. So, but the right to the right, it's much more fluid. He reaches more. It's a much larger stride length. Okay, now let's go back to the left again. So there's just a moment now going to the left on the left front where it's just a little bit, as the foot comes into the ground, his shoulder braces, his head wants to be turned to the outside. He doesn't really want to, it's just not the same. And going into the canter and staying into the canter, he seems to want to break more this direction than he would going to the right. Stride length is just a bit shorter. As he comes into the ground, you can see it's just not the same. His head's more up, and when he was going to the right, he was much more stretched out and was willing to go. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started, and the first thing we're gonna do is just evaluate his current ratios. We're gonna make an estimate of the widest part of the foot with the shoe on, draw where his heel's in, draw the place of his breakover, and just see where the balance is in relation to the widest part of the foot. So since he seems to have a little bit more of an issue on the left side, that's where we're gonna start with. So the first thing that I'm going to tell you and see or show you when I look here is we're going to use the same guidelines that we always do. And if you look down on the bottom of his foot here, you're going to see where this curvature starts to come in, where his bar terminates right here in this area. And he does the same thing on this side. Now he's broken his bars out. Seems like he's ready to be trimmed. There's fractures here. Okay, but you can see pretty close to where that bar wants to end. Now the other thing we're going to do is measure approximately 1 inch from the apex of his frog, and as an estimate in the beginning, I'm not going to get too carried away, and you can see that's still fairly close to where these bars seem to terminate. This frog is slightly narrowed, a little bit stretched, but what we're doing today is just getting an estimate of where these are. So right now, currently, his widest part of his foot is here, okay? His heels are, at least on the shoe, are ending here. And the roll in the front part of his foot, or his breakover, is here. So if you were to take and look at this right now, you would see that there's 1.5 times more in front of his foot than there is behind his foot. And interestingly enough, I'm going to go ahead and measure from here approximately, we're going to say a little over 1.75 inches, so maybe 1 7/8 inches, 2 inches to the tip of the bone. And his breakover, we would like to see actually back here. Now, to show you, if you just look at this horse's foot from the bottom, it doesn't necessarily look like it's that distorted. Okay, when you look at it from the lateral view, it does not look like it's that distorted. But to show you how the subtleties and how the hoof capsule can stretch and move without actually having the appearance of a big dish or a flare in it is very important. Now this is something that I don't encourage anybody to try at home. This is something that I just need to kind of show you and make a point of how this foot is distorted and how those ratios will affect how this horse goes. So you can see that the shoe is nailed on here. This is the inner rim of the shoe. And once again, here's where the tip of the bone is, approximately. This is where we'd like him to break over. And I'm pretty certain that there's at least that much distortion in his foot. So we're going on the inner rim of the shoe. And we're driving a nail straight into his sole. And you can see he didn't fidget, he didn't fuss, he wasn't bothered in any way, shape, form, or fashion. That is a Delta City 5 or City Head Slim, and it's that far on the inner rim of the shoe. You can see where the placement of these nails are in the white line. That's how distorted this foot is. Now we're going to do our best to try to get this foot or this shoe placed back around the bone. And if you look at the lateral view of this, that nail has actually come out relatively high. You can see just the tip of it here sticking out. Now, from the side before, you wouldn't have thought that you could get a nail in the sole of this horse's foot that high, especially at 7.5 weeks. So once again, please don't try this at home. But it is to show you that we at the ELPO have done a lot of this hoof mapping and landmarks, and we've done several hundred horses' feet, and we feel very comfortable with being able to look at the bottom of the foot, find where the widest part of the foot is, come very close within a quarter to an eighth of an inch of the tip of the coffin bone. And with those guidelines, it doesn't matter if you use a Kirkhart or a natural balance shoe, a center fit shoe, a Workman, it doesn't matter what you use. If you know where the tip of the bone is, where the center of the joint is, and you can place a shoe in relation to that around the joint, these horses are going to do much better. So, with all of that, it's really important to understand where we're going with this. Okay, this is quite possibly why he might have some issues going to the left. I can pull this nail out, and there's nothing that comes out of there. That is all stretched, distorted horn and sole. So it's very important that we can recognize where the widest part of the foot is, where the tip of the bone is, and place a shoe around there to minimize the amount of leverage and strain on the connective tissue of these horses. These horses do nothing but go in circle after circle after circle. And it's not that they're just going in circles, but now we're asking them to collect, get shorter, and go into a smaller circle. And then we ask them to go into a smaller circle. And then we ask them to pee off and passage in a way where they have to be so collected that they're moving this direction. And we know that the coffin joint and the PIP joint is what's called a ginglymus hinge joint. So it only moves one direction. It's not designed to move right and left repetitively. And those are the things that will help these horses go even further than what they were able to do to begin with. So we're going to go ahead and pull this shoe off. So once we've taken this shoe off, some things that we can see is if we were to mark where the dimple is, and there's a lot that's ready to exfoliate here, and feel, it's kind of hard because these heels are quite run forward. These are where your heels are ending. The dimple actually comes down and is right in here. And if you feel there's a flattened area here, this is where the back part of his foot is. So those heels are quite run forward. A good, I don't know, a little over a quarter of an inch or so, 5/8. So by being able to trim these heels, you can see how curled and rolled they are. Okay, all of this stuff is ready to break and fracture, and this is quite trashy. I think before we do anything else, we're going to go ahead and just leverage test him, just to see what this foot shows us. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do when we leverage test is we're just going to go ahead and get a baseline on the other side. So I'm going to pick up the opposite foot and see how easy or willing he is to get off of this one. So he's very willing. There's no hesitation at all. No problem. So when we put these leverage boots on, we'll start out with the heel raised, and we always test 180 degrees from where we were. We'll give them a minute to kind of get used to the boot and the straps and get comfortable there, because it feels completely different for him. And that's pretty much the baseline. Doesn't really seem to object there. Go 180 degrees. He's a little harder there. He wants to come off it a little bit. So it's just very slightly less comfortable than the baseline. So I mean, it would just barely be a -1. Next thing we're going to do is test the lateral side, the straight outside. So he's not quite as willing. That's a little bit more than before. Then the baseline, I'm really squeezing here, and he doesn't really want to give that back up. Quick to put it down. That would be -1, -2. Raise the straight inside. So that's the baseline. It's the same as it was. He's just content to stand there. It's not so good that he's willing to rest the other foot. So he does not like the outside raised. He does like the inside raised, at least at a baseline. Next thing we're going to do is go the lateral toe. Just slightly harder to get off the ground. It'd be like a -1. The inside heel. Very willing to pick that up. Willing to stand on it. Doesn't really come off of it. Doesn't really unweight it. And it's actually softer than the baseline to get him to pick his foot up. He'll point this one or leave it out there. So I would say that's a +1. Medial toe. And that's the same as baseline. The last thing we'll raise is this outside heel, the lateral heel. It's a little harder than the baseline to get off, and he's quick to put it down. So I would say that's a -1. So in looking at that, what we basically see is that he's got slight discomfort, you know, from one side from inside to outside, but there's not a real clear, definite lameness that you can see when he goes. Maybe there's a little bit of a stiffening when he goes to the left, but there's nothing that jumps out and says, okay, we need to do something, raise the side or you know, really aggressively get off to another side. I think with this guy, all we're really going to need to do is get his foot back into proportions and get the shoe placed around the bone, and I think that'll be very beneficial for him. So if I just run through this really quick, the bars are fractured, ready to come loose. You can see how much is just ready to pop out of here. The central sulcus is fairly wide. The heels are a bit run forward from the dimple, you know, and obviously here's the nail hole in the sole. You can see how far back that is from the edge of the wall, and even from the white line where that nail is. It's a good ½ of an inch or so back into the horse's foot. So there's the distortions seem to come this way, and his heels seem to be run forward. You know, his bars have already fractured out of here, but there's quite a bit of fractures. So we're going to go ahead and exfoliate this, get this foot prepared and ready for a shoe. I always like to start with my frog, and getting a good clear picture of your frog is important. If you can see the frog clearly, it's going to be an indicator to you for many other things. This frog apex is slightly stretched. I'm just grabbing this and seeing what wants to peel off of here. I'm not getting too carried away. I'm going to see if I can clean this up just ever so slightly. This foot actually has a little more depth. It's a little deceiving. It looks like it's not. You can see that frog starts to round out there as we get back to more of the true apex. I'm going to go ahead. There's quite a bit of frog here. You can see a layer or a fracture here of this frog that wants to come off. So we're just going to kind of run our nippers up underneath there and see how much that wants to peel out of there. As we're cleaning this out, you can start to see the amount of depth of heel here, okay? You can start to feel where those bars come in, which is an inch back from the apex of the frog. So there's my first mark for finding the widest part of my foot. I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of some of this chalkiness. You can see that there's a bit of a trap there in the toe, and that seems to come from leverage. You can see how trashy this wall is. So these feet have dried out quite significantly, and he's only been here from Florida a week and a half. All I'm trying to do really is just get these fractures out of here, and you can see how this is just chalky, flaking up. It's a little hard to We're going to find the widest part of this foot. You can still see, and actually, it's more about where my pick comes to, because his bars have fractured out so much that they appear to come down right in here. You can still see there's a little bit of a swell right here that happens where they want to come into. I'm going to go ahead and finish marking this out, get a better gauge of where the tip of the bone is. We're going to say that when this size foot, just a little over 1 3/4 inches and just 1/4 inch in front of that is where we would like him to break over. Now you can see very clearly, and I've been trying to leave these heels here. I would normally have trimmed those out to get down in here a little bit better. And I will do that, but the ratios here are quite significant. I mean, if it is twice as the length, almost, out in front than it is behind, and this is all stretched material. We're going to go ahead and trim this. You're going to be very, very aware that a lot of this wants to fracture and break out. A lot of this is already gone. I'm going to start just behind. And just in one nipper cut, you can see from where those heels were to where they've come back to. And that was just a nipper cut. So we try to prepare the back half of the foot first before we go to the front half of the foot. I put this trim line in here to make sure that I stay safe on the front part of the foot. There isn't really a whole lot of depth from here to here. It is slightly higher on this lateral side from here to here than it is from here to here. But one of the other things I wanted to point out is if you take a look here closely, the curvature, how this heel comes straight back and then starts making an abrupt turn to it. This horse on this foot, I would say, has probably got a slight club foot or upright foot with the way those heels decide to turn in. And they come straight back and then they make an abrupt turn. And here's something that we've been taught in history's past and things that we still teach today, and that is to try to make the right foot look like the left foot. And the left foot is slightly more upright, okay? Has a little bit more curvature to the heels. And when we start trying to make them match to our eyes, and we start looking at it from the outside here at a lateral view, what will end up happening is we'll start to get that toe to migrate forward because we want the toe to be longer and we'll want those heels to be, you know, lower. So it's trying to make this one, the left one, look like the right one, oftentimes is more detrimental than anything. So, and that's how you'll get that distorted, where we can drive a nail on the inner rim of a shoe halfway up the horse's foot. So we'll go ahead and finish preparing the front part of this foot, and then we'll pull it forward and dress it, because I think that we're going to take quite a bit of this off. I'll only be taking just a few rasp strokes here on this lateral side. All right, so I'm going to state this right now. We use uniform hoof wall thickness, but this foot is extremely stretched. Right here is where I drove that nail. And so I'm actually going to push this a little bit and try to take as much of that off the front and get this more in proportions. So although that it appears that this is the thickness of the hoof wall, the sole is actually stretched on this horse as well. And you can see that by the placement of that nail in the middle of the sole. I'm going to go ahead and pull it forward and dress it. Something that's very typical from horses that come back east to Colorado in a very dry environment is that they tend to dry up. Any place where the nail holes have come through will become brittle and break off. Not too concerned about that, because if you see where these nail holes are placed, they were actually all quite in front of where the widest part and where we're going to put the majority of our nails. So a combination of leverage and the change in the humidity will allow that to happen. As you can see, the majority of my rasping has been done on the front part of the foot. So as you can see, I didn't really, I rasped quite a bit off here. They're still stretched out. I have kind of gotten into where the white line is. And one of the things to keep in mind with this foot being a club foot or more of an upright foot is that it's very similar to a laminitic horse or a horse that's foundered, where the toe will stretch and there'll be almost a laminar wedge here that will put leverage on the connective tissue in the back half of the foot. So with a club foot, it is okay to start to get some of that off of there. And it seems like in the past and what we've done, the sooner we get that off, the more that grows down and stays more stable and becomes uniform again. So I'm not too concerned. I'm probably going to go ahead and shape my shoe, place it around the bone, and dress that just a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the old shoe, show you where the lines are of where we wanted the breakover to be, which is here, okay, and where the shoe was sitting, where the heels were in comparison to where they are now. And choosing a shoe for this is going to be interesting, because this shoe is a size number 3 Kirkhart, all right, and if you look at that, it's going to be much smaller. This is a size number 2 center fit, okay, and the reason why I'm going to go with this shoe is for a couple of reasons. One, I've got my marks here to help line up with the widest part of the foot. The other is that if you look at this shoe from a profile, there's a higher inner rim here, and with him having to do multiple amounts of turns daily in an arena with a rider, collected, smaller and smaller turns, any amount of leverage reduction where that shoe will roll quite easily medial-laterally is going to be important for him. So choosing this shoe is what seems to be best for this application here. You can see with my hash marks line up to the widest part of the foot, you can still see how much of this is hanging over here. But where our breakover is here and where it lines up on the foot is fairly close. There's a little bit of thickness to the steel here, so I'm going to be able to narrow that and get that to fit pretty nice. A 1 would be too small, and I'm going to grab a 3 and show you what a 3 looks like and why a 3 would be too big. I can shape a 3. This one's already been somewhat shaped, and it would seem like that might be an okay fit. The problem is there's still quite a bit of steel here hanging over both sides. So in order for me to get this shoe to fit, I'm going to have to narrow it quite significantly, and then I'm going to lengthen the shoe as well. So we're going to go ahead and use a 2. All right, so you can see that I've got an excess of foot laid out here. My proportions are much better. My breakover is right underneath where the breakover line is marked. I'm just going to nipper this off. There's a quite amount. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to show you that this shoe was sitting here. Okay, here was the widest part of the foot. This is how far in front that shoe was. Okay, and you can see how the whole base of support was forward, and there was an extreme amount of leverage out at the toe, not just front to back, but also when he went to turn. So because I've already drove a nail through there, I'm pretty certain that this is all stretched dead tissue or horn, And it is. It just nippers right off of there. So you can see now that our ratios from our heels to the widest part of the foot here is 50-50 to the shoe, and it's easily 60-30 or 70-30 to where the breakover is. You can see that the shoes still fit. This is a little bit broke out. I'm not too concerned about that. Once again, that's from the change in environment and also from the leverage of weakening that hoof wall. So we got some really good nails in. We'll undercut this, finish it off so that it doesn't look, so it still has got a really nice appearance to it. And just because you're setting a shoe back and getting the shoe placed around the bone doesn't mean that you need to leave it where it's you know, you can do a nice job and have it look good without maybe. So in choosing a shoe for this foot is actually larger than the left front, and that's quite all right. There's no problem with that whatsoever. Oftentimes we've been taught to, you know, you need to have the same size shoe on. Well, that's not the case. You need to place the shoe around the widest part of the foot and in relation to your tip of your bone and where you'd like to have the breakover. This is a size 3 and the other one was a size 2. So I got fortunate in my truck. This one was already shaped, so we're ready to go. I'm gonna just box it really quick and nail her on. When we look at this hind foot after we clean it out, it's the same story all the way around. It's really interesting how looking at it from the top doesn't really give you a clear picture of what's going on until you look at it from the bottom and you look at the landmarks of where the bars terminate, approximately an inch back from the apex of the frog. Look at where the bars kind of come in and terminate. We're going to say that this is about the widest part of the foot. You have your heels here, and your breakover is actually right up here. So you look at that, it's about an inch ahead of where you would like it to be. Yep. So interestingly enough, I got visited with the vet about the radiographs on this horse's feet and the hind end, and according to the radiographs, the plane of the coffin bone was fairly flat. It wasn't very positive at all, and it was almost at a negative. And what we found when we started to exfoliate that, and you've seen me get my hoof testers out and check the density of the sole, is I was actually able to exfoliate quite a bit of it, which is going to help the positive angle of that plane. I actually took more from the toe, at least the depth from the toe, than I did from the heel. And the other thing is that I will probably put a bit of a taper or help reduce the leverage in the shoe itself to help with that and the positive angle. So oftentimes, you know, sometimes you're not able to do that. Sometimes it holds on to a lot of sole and it will retain the sole of the toe, which is almost pushing that bone backwards. So it's important to not always just come up with a plan and say, this is what I'm going to do because of the radiographs. Get in, start exfoliating your foot, see what what the foot's gonna let you have, and then move forward from there. And then if you need to put a wedge pad or do something different, you can move forward from there. So when I'm choosing a hind shoe, some of the things I'm looking at is that the one seems to fit really nice right where I want it, at the widest part of the foot and having the breakover. But something that we have found and we have noticed is that a lot of these horses that have a lot of collection and are asked to be in deep-footed arenas consistently, they need to be able to, at the back half of their stride, to push off so that they're stifle and hock release and step forward. And if you end up putting a shoe that might seem that it's perfect and lines up with your lines but might be a little bit too far back, the foot will actually come all the way back, and instead of pushing off at the back half of the stride, it will just dump over and drag its foot through the arena. And that's something with these upper level dressage horses, or even any type of performance horse that's in a deep footed arena, reining horses, cutting horses, they really need to be able to push off in the back part of that foot. So the shoe that I'm going to choose is a center fit performance hind, and it's got a bit of a wider web at the toe so that they can get a little bit of more of a purchase, and that it holds them up in that deeper arena. It creates almost like a float so that they can push off of, instead of the toe just dipping in and dragging through. So I'm going to go with the size number 2. It still fits. I think I'm going to be able to cover the areas, get the proportions correct. And the other thing is that there's a taper, what I was talking about, on the toe of this shoe from here to almost here, which is the second nail hole, that allows that foot to not only come into the ground. Troy Kerr was very instrumental in helping us understand how the hind end works. As that foot comes into the ground, it lands heel first, slides, and then pushes off again. And so it needs to be able to slide ever so slightly as it comes into the ground. And if it does not slide, the hock will come out, there will be strain on the stifle or the lower back. So the shoe that I'm going to put on this horse today, it seems to be very beneficial for several reasons as a performance hind. Once again, it's the web to allow them to push off and not dump over in the back, and it also has a long taper so that the hind foot can land and slide ever so slightly. So you can see that our proportions after we're done are even more so. They're easily, 50-50 to the shoe, but to break over, which is actually grounded in right to here, is quite significantly less. So, that's really good. You still have a nice wide brim here to help that horse not sink in, and we still reduce the leverage quite a bit. So as he loosens up going here to the left, his stride length is much looser. It's not stiff when he hits the ground. He seems a little more playful, is ready to go. He's got a bit more of a spring and a step going to the left now, whereas before it was quite peg-legged. So he looks like he feels good. He went right into the canter. She didn't have to push him. She doesn't have to drive him quite as much as she did before. He seems to be blowing and releasing quite a bit. He looks really good. Does it seem easier to have him canter? It doesn't sound like he's forging anymore. So in conclusion, what we've seen at the end here with the lunging is he was definitely more willing to go forward in the left lead, trotting to the left, or in the left lead canter. And you know, even watching him walk out here on the hard ground, he went from a very toe first landing to much more flat landing. And the more we watch him walk, the more it starts to unfold, and he wants to get that heel in contact with the ground, which is really a positive thing. The main thing that we want to point out here is that keeping an eye on the ratios and the balance of the foot and looking at your landmarks from the bottom, finding the widest part of the foot, balancing the shoe around the bone, around the joint, is going to minimize the amount of lameness and injuries that are going to cause, and it'll help prevent some of those things from happening. And that's really what we're about. We're about trying to catch it on the front end so the back end doesn't necessarily happen. And so, you know, it doesn't matter whether we're looking at dressage horses, reining horses, cutting horses, performance horses of any kind, even just your trail horse that's outside, you know, in your backyard. It's important to balance the shoe or put the shoe around the bone and the joint. Regardless whether the foot looks like from the outside, you could see in the beginning that the hoof pastern axis was fairly straight, and it certainly didn't appear that there was that much leverage or distortion. And obviously after we mapped the foot out and looked at our landmarks, you could clearly see a difference. So those are the important things that we're doing here today. And you know, we're going to get some more video of him here in the next day or two under saddle and see how he's doing, and get some more feedback from the owner on, you know, is he still having as much difficulty going to the left? Is he having a problem in the right lead canter, and so on. So thank you, and I hope that I gave you some information that you can take with you and apply, you know, at your convenience.